secure SAP apps and SAP SSO enablement and EMM solutions is the topic, as Lauren said, and I would like to give you a short and precise overview about the points to take into consideration when doing so. Let's start with the preface. So one message is clear: business goes mobile. This has grown very much in the last years. And in the meantime, I say that always in my trainings as well. The mobile email sync is an old hat, so that's something that even customers don't ask us anymore. That's self-understanding that this works. And the focus is definitely on business apps nowadays. And one of those business apps, or several, of course, are also attached to SAP systems. This, of course, leads to increase in efficiency of business processes and increase availability of business data on the go, and, of course, allow secure access from everywhere. And as said, SAP is not an exception. So which SAP mobile apps can we actually integrate on mobiles? There's basically no limits. I will show you three of the most frequent ones. This is, of course, SAP Fiori, the solution, the mobile solution for iOS and Android of SAP itself. The interesting thing about SAP Fiori is that it offers a custom client. That means you can actually personalize or build in your CI and also configure the app based on your needs. Then another company, i7, they are providing the i7 mobility for SAP apps, very frequent as well at customers, which then attaches to your SAP backends. And last but not least, an app that has grown a lot also within our customer bases is SAP SuccessFactors from SAP itself. All of these apps offer in one way or the other MDM support and, of course, also authentication support. And as mentioned already, iOS and for iOS and Android. Now, to what do we have to pay attention when we integrate these apps? Of course, the data has to be secure on the device. So you have to secure data with your MDM system on the devices itself. Secure communication has to take place. That means that end-to-end encryption. And of course, an authentication strategy. Here we recommend, for usability reasons, we recommend SSO, so that the user can just start the app and work with it without having to handle any authentication. And usually how we approach those SAP projects, which are medium to large scale projects, is building, securing, and deploying the apps to the device. Why medium to large scale projects? Of course, it depends a bit how many users. If you want to bring services to both platforms, iOS and Android. And then, of course, it's based on what services you want to provide in the SAP apps. And usually you get a lot of people on the table when starting or during the project because there are many parties involved, starting with AD, network, and especially then the SAP teams, which needs to configure their backends to be mobile ready, if not already. Now let's have a look how we secure data on the devices. iOS and Android are a bit different here. So on iOS, of course, first step is to do a managed app distribution. That means to distribute the app via your MDM system to the device. Then some of the apps sometimes you need to integrate your MDM's app frameworks. That's actually usually done by the app vendor itself, like the ISAC 7 app offers app frameworks or interfaces to almost every state-of-the-art MDM system like Mobile Iron and Watch. And last but not least, you will, of course, integrate data loss prevention. So that means a separation on the device, especially when you're going with a bring your own device strategy to separate those apps, the business apps, from the private apps. Don't forget, I told you before, the SAP Fiori app can also have a custom client. That means that you will have to do some development for the app. So you will get the source from the source code of the app from SAP and some development work to actually bring in your icons, bring in your CI, background, colors, etc., but also configure the app in terms of security and authentication. So this also involves a bit of development. In Android, the whole story looks a bit different. We recommend also in Outlook of the device administrator change, which will be introduced with Android 10, to use Android Enterprise, which already separates business from private apps. So you don't have to do a lot about data loss prevention. This is already done on the operating system level. And as well there, you can have a custom client for SAP Fiori, which you can even name also for iOS with a name you like. Now, another point of view we have to pay attention when we say about securing data. Will you actually have offline data available in your apps on your mobile? Then, of course, we have to pay attention to that as well. If you're just doing online access to SAP backends, there will be no data besides the login and server name on the device itself. And, of course, user awareness. This is something that should always be also looked at to create user awareness, how to work with the apps or in general with business data on the device. For that, we usually do guidelines or usage policies. The guidelines can be a piece of paper. The guidelines can be also explained during a workshop, an onboarding workshop, however. Now, when we talk about the secure communication from your apps, from your SAP apps towards the backend, I think you don't have to mention it, TLS, SSL, so end-to-end encryption of the traffic. Usually, customers use app proxies or gateways in the DMZ. That can be an MDM solutions proxy, like, for example, in Mobile Iron, the Mobile Iron Sentry, which will handle the requests which come from the internet. And you can also involve the so-called SAP Web Dispatcher, which we will anyway need for the authentication mechanisms, which we will see later. But the SAP Web Dispatcher could also act as a proxy if your MDM solution doesn't have a proxy, can handle the traffic, so also placed in the DMZ, and handle the traffic coming from the internet. Let's talk about authentication strategy. Of course, you can use username password, so basic authentication, but maybe then you would lead in those issues. So let's say nowadays it's not so user-friendly to have username passwords and basic authentication. So as mentioned in the beginning, we suggest to use SSO strategies, like we did for some customers with certificate-based authentication, so that you distribute a certificate to the device and actually help users, not help users, let users authenticate with that certificate-based, so with no interaction of the user itself. Purpose Constraint Delegation, KCD, is also one of the SSO strategies supported with all of the apps I've told you. This, of course, depends then also on the proxy configuration, which you place in the DMZ, and implies also the backend to accept the authentication. So some configuration is also needed on the SAP backend. SAML is also an SSO, a possible SSO strategy you can have. There you also have to keep in mind that in order to get an assertion ticket, so a SAML ticket, you usually need to authenticate. So the user needs to authenticate to the identity provider. That's the one that issues, the server that issues the SAML ticket. And there, of course, this is usually done with passwords. So but it would be a mix between the first and the last, but you could also think of combining. Let's say in order to get the SAML ticket, you use certificate-based and purpose constraint delegation, and so you have pure SSO at the end again. That really depends on your strategy of the company, how you use maybe already, how you already do authentication, what is your standard, etc. But a combination is, of course, possible between those authentication methods. Again, the involved SAP components in order to provide authentication is the so-called SAP Authentication Proxy plugin. This is a plugin which usually SAP teams know what it means. And again, the SAP Web Dispatcher that needs to handle not only the traffic, but also the authentication. Actually, the Web Dispatcher passes on the authentication to the backend, and on the backend you have the Authentication Proxy plugin. This is a short implementation example we did as a customer. You see, this has to show that many parties can be involved in such a project. So we have, of course, from the device to the DMZ, we have maybe, in this example, we have the MDM system, so the Mobile Arm Sentry handling the requests, which will pass on communication and authentication to your backends. This specific customer has even a WAF, so web application firewall in between, and which does some pre-checks and passes on the communication to the corporate network. This is not a state-of-the-art example. This is an integration, implementation example we did during a project at a customer. This can look differently in your environment, of course, because it depends on your infrastructure, how many zones do you have, how does your backend look, what authentication strategy you would like to have. Now, what about Nomasis and SAP? What's our expertise, or what's our experience we have? So we have several customers already, and we did several customer integrations of SAP. As I mentioned, medium to large scale projects. So the longest project for the SAP took a year and a half. The shortest maybe 3 to 4 months. Depends also a bit on the size of the company and which services you want to offer. We implemented already different flavors. So the ones I've told you before, so with certificate-based authentication, with Kerberos constraint delegation, SAML, etc., but also help integrating SAP not only with Mobile Iron, but also with different mobile device management systems. At the end, you know, everybody cooks with the same water. At the end, whether you use this or that NDM system, this can everything works in a way the same. So the whole thing is less depending on the infrastructure, it's more depending on how well the project is led. And cooperation with the SAP backend team is crucial. That means that if we always try to closely work with the SAP backend team, because they have to do much more than on the other end. So the backend, SAP backend needs much more configuration than the MDM system or the distribution of the apps and devices. That's actually a piece of cake. That's why I would like to emphasize that a well-planned and well-planned project management when integrating SAP, but also other business apps. We need a well-planned and guided project management, and that's actually our strength. We are not SAP specialists, but because we have a lot of experience in this regard, we can actually lead the project. We can help you in onboarding also the SAP backend team to the project, help them to configure, to show maybe examples of other customers, etc. So there has never been an issue with that, that project failed, an SAP project never failed with the customer, as long as also the SAP team is strong and knowing what we're talking about, and vice versa.